It certainly is a serious thing for an enemy to invade your country and cities. There is generally so much destruction. But I must say the rebels behaved themselves well. In passing through town, it took them about 17 hours altogether. We may estimate the whole number at about 70,000.
The Confederates leave Frederick heading west along the National Road. Their whereabouts a mystery to the Union commander, General George McClellan. In stark contrast to the Confederates, the Union Army enters Frederick to cheers and applause. Then, as luck would have it, a Union soldier finds a document near Monocacy Junction, known as Special Order 191, showing the scattered positions of Lee's army. From Frederick County, McClellan sets off in pursuit. Standing between him and Lee's army is South Mountain.
What General McClellan was trying to do was to try and catch General Lee's army while it was still apart, still divided in pieces. And in order to do that, he had to traverse these mountain passes.
Lee decides he cannot let that happen. So he will send his rear guard division under Daniel Harvey Hill, just about 8,000 troops who had been stationed at Boonesboro, to delay the Union troops as long as possible. And that is why the Battle of South Mountain unfolded.
South Mountain would be the first major battle on Union soil. The battle centered on 3 gaps in South Mountain: Crampton's Gap, Turner's Gap, and Fox's Gap.
The good news for the Confederates was the terrain. They are defending a mountaintop. This is heavily wooded slopes, boulder-strewn slopes.
There's a lot of steep hills, and then it goes down into a very major hollow, and then after that you got to climb back up the mountain again. The fighting in that area was very tough.
Usually those mountain slopes are beautiful, idyllic, peaceful, but on that Sunday in September, as one soldier wrote, all the demons of hell were let loose that day.
At Fox's Gap, rebel reinforcements stalled the advance of the Union's 9th Corps.
Jesse Reno is commander of the Union Army's 9th Corps. And just about twilight on September 14th, he'll gallop his way to the top of South Mountain, and he wants to find out why his 9th Corps advance has stalled.
Steady!
And as they advance, they drew the fire of those Confederates, and one of the bullets will topple Reno from the saddle. So he was one of the highest-ranking general officers to lose his life during the Civil War.
All told, the Battle of South Mountain claims more than 5,000 dead, wounded, and missing. Among the wounded is a future president, Rutherford B. Hayes.
He falls with a severe wound, and he's caught between these contending lines of battle with an arm that was shattered.
Thank God for the Union soldier as well as the Confederate soldier. Night fell on the battlefield.
For the civilians whose land became a battlefield, the nightmare was just beginning.
As far as being a civilian on a battlefield, it had to be a horrendous experience. And I like to use the example of Daniel Wise at Fox's Gap. One day, he's a farmer, and he's got a little mountain cabin. The next day, there are hundreds of dead bodies around his farm. His house had been used as a field hospital on the 15th. There were piles of limbs. And there are 58 Confederate bodies dumped down his well. So his whole livelihood is ruined. In many respects, It was the Hurricane Katrina of their day. They were just wiped out, but it was not a natural disaster, it was a man-made disaster.
Driven off the mountain, the Confederates move west to the village of Sharpsburg. Their backs to the Potomac and the Yankees in front.
The soldiers of both armies laid down for what I think must be a very uneasy night. The lines were close enough that neither side built fires because they would be silhouetted against the light and become targets.
As Union and Confederate regiments fall into positions surrounding the small town of Sharpsburg, the day's fighting will unfold as 3 battles in one, starting at dawn in an area known as the cornfield.
And while it wasn't any protection against bullets, obviously, it was a visual barrier. They didn't know what or who were on the other side of that corn.
After 3 to 4 hours of fighting, more than 10,000 men are casualties, killed, wounded, missing, taken prisoner. The bloodiest square mile of land on the Antietam battlefield.
By late morning, a second battle begins along a sunken road known as Bloody Lane.
What's at stake? If the sunken road falls, if the Federals are able to penetrate into the very middle of Lee's lines, they could potentially separate Lee's army into 2 pieces, both of which could then be overwhelmed.
Leading the Union attack is General Israel Richardson.
As Richardson comes in, they're going to be able to flank the sunken road and drive the Confederates out of it. That the Confederate line collapses, the survivors either surrender or run for their lives to the rear.
Don't give an inch!
At a very critical moment, Richardson is gathering artillery support to sustain his advance. He's preparing to move them forward. He is struck by pieces of a Confederate artillery shell, wounded in the shoulder, and he's carried to the rear. When he does, nobody there is willing on their own authority to continue the advance.
By early afternoon, with both sides bloodied and beaten, the third battle erupts around a stone bridge that crosses Antietam Creek. After hours of fighting, Union troops under Ambrose Burnside force the rebels back, and Lee faces his darkest hour.
But Burnside makes a fatal delay. He'll stop his advance in order for his army to replenish ammunition and get rations. That fatal pause is long enough for Lee's final reinforcements to arrive on the field, and they're able to push the Federals back to Antietam Creek. So by 6 p.m., the battle is over.
Lee's final stand allows him a chance to retreat back into Virginia, preventing an all-out victory for McClellan.
Lee is not leaving because he left the water running in the bathtub on the other side of the Potomac River. He's leaving because he got beat.
The Battle of Antietam was the bloodiest one-day battle in American history. After 12 hours of fighting, more than 23,000 casualties. And this includes nearly 4,000 men killed outright.
If you look at the total number of casualties, a little over 23,000, and do the math, on an average, it works out to every other second for 12 hours, a bullet is hitting flesh.
And for the residents of Sharpsburg, the war left an indelible mark.
Some citizens had been in their cellars all day, and they crept out, and their first view of the landscape was something they never forgot. There were wounded men and dead men and dying men everywhere. These were images that were just seared onto the minds of everyone, but certainly especially children. The